Calumet Editions, an eclectic publisher of fiction, non-fiction, and poetry, introduced a new business model nearly a decade ago, in which the publisher and author work as equal partners in a joint venture. Their stable of authors have won numerous and prestigious prizes across literary forms. Where traditional publishers fail to see the value in projects, Calumet cooperates with his authors in realizing a book's potential.
Welcome to Writer's Corner. I'm Rob Jung, sitting in for Alan Miller this month. This month, Writer's Corner goes international with noted mystery author Stanley Trollip, who's from South Africa, and Annamaria Alfieri, who's from New York City, who I kid her as being another foreign country, at least to us here in Minnesota. Stan, you are best known in literary circles for writing the Detective Kubu series, set in Botswana with Michael Sears under the pen name Michael Stanley. But you also just released a book that you wrote yourself called Wolfman that's set in Minnesota. We'll get to that in just a little bit. Annamaria, you are from New York City, but you write books that are set in East Africa and South America. Yeah. And you've also written a good deal of nonfiction.
Yes,
correct?
Yes.
Okay, we will talk a little bit more about that later as well. But let's start out just by having a little bit of background for both of you. Annamaria, tell us what it was, what led you to become a novel writer.
I think I fell in love with fiction when I was just able to read a book. And so when I was a little girl, 9 years old, I announced to my mother that I was going to, when I grew up, I was going to be a novelist. Mm-hmm. I was very in love with that word, novelist. And it's a dream that I never gave up, but I come from a poor working class family, so what I wanted to do was what all the kids I went to school with wanted to do, was to get out of where we were and get the best education we could, etc. And so I did that, and I worked hard, but once my daughter was finished with college without tuition debt, I just decided that it was my turn. So I had been writing fiction my whole life, but I concentrated on that, and then at the age of 68, my first novel was published.
Well, so, congratulations.
Yeah, I like to tell that story because I think there are a lot of people who think your dreams don't come true after a certain age, and that's not true.
That is true. You're correct. That is not true. Stan, how about you? Tell us a little about your background.
I was born and raised in South Africa, in Johannesburg, and my undergraduate degree was in statistics, of all things. And I then came to the United States, to the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, to study the use of computers in education. I never thought of myself as a writer, but when I look back, I realize that all my life I've been writing. At high school, I contributed to the annual school magazine. I started and edited and largely wrote a little newspaper at the high school. I became the editor of a newspaper, a weekly newspaper at the university. And then I went to university in Illinois and started writing nonfiction, and wrote 3 nonfiction books with a friend about the use of computers in education, and also one with a different friend on aviation safety. So all of that was the sort of background to becoming a writer.
You set the Detective Kubu series in Botswana. Why Botswana?
Yeah, I used to go back to South Africa every year when I was teaching in this country. And what I like to do is to go out into the bush, into nature in southern Africa, which is spectacular. And because I was a private pilot, I would rent a small plane, get all my friends or some of my friends and fill up the plane, and we would go into Zimbabwe or Botswana bird watching and game watching. And on one of those trips, we saw a pack of hyenas hunting and killing a wildebeest, which is a very large antelope. And in 3 to 4 hours, it disappeared. The hyenas had eaten the whole thing, flesh and bones. And Michael, who was one of my passengers at the time, we sort of looked at each other and said, if we ever need to get rid of a body, you leave it out for the hyenas, because there's nothing left there and no body, no case. And because that idea happened in Botswana, and for a number of other reasons which are not important really, we decided that it was such a good premise to leave a body out for hyenas that we would try to write a book ourselves. And so, because we were both hardworking academics, it took us about 10 or 15 years to even start that book. And eventually we did, and started in 2003 and finished it 3 years later.
Very good. And Annamaria, your books, you live in one of the meccas of places to write mysteries and things, New York City, but
Yes.
yet you write books set in East Africa and in South America. Explain that anomaly.
Well, another thing goes back to my youth, is that we had an atlas, and I used to look at the places, and I would wonder, look at that little island. I wonder what the people there look like. So I developed a wanderlust, and I also like to learn the history of places that I visit. So I started the idea of setting novels in places that have an interesting history that are fascinating to me. So my first novel is set in Potosi, in Spanish Africa, and it's in the 1700s. So it's a very exotic place, and I like the idea of exotic places and their history, and so I stayed in South America for a while, and each book is a standalone. But then my publisher said, it's time for you to start having a series. And so, okay. And then where would I set a series? And by then I had fallen in love with Africa and the East Africa particularly. And I decided that my imagination would be happy if I did a whole series. And I chose colonial Africa because on colonial times, people have a lot of reasons to want to kill one another. And if you're going to write a series, and I'm not particularly fond of series where there are 300 people living in a small town, and every month there's another dead body, I thought this would work out for a series. So that's why I set my series in British East Africa, starting in 1911. And my publisher calls it Out of Africa Meets Agatha Christie. So I'm happy about that.
Very good. So your protagonists in that series, Vera McIntosh and Justin Tolliver, where did you come up with them?
Well, in that case, I was really very careful about that, because I wanted to portray colonial Africa, but I didn't want it to come across as the good old days of colonialism. That was not anything I would want to do. So what I did was to create 3 characters. Vera McIntosh is the daughter of Scottish missionaries. So with that, she grew up with Kikuyu children and her parents, and so she doesn't have a point of view of an African, but she also doesn't have a point of view of a Scot. She has both. And then Justin Tolliver he's the son of a nobleman, a Yorkshire nobleman, and he wants to stay in Africa, but his family doesn't have enough money to keep him there in the lap of luxury that he grew up in. So what happened was he was looking at the world in two ways because he became a detective in the police at that time. And then there is one of my favorites, Kwai Labazo. He's an African man, but he's half Kikuyu and half Maasai. So he doesn't belong to the Maasai and he doesn't belong to the Kikuyu. So all of these people have two different points of view. And so using their own thoughts, I can look at Africa at that time from a 21st century point of view. I did that very deliberately.
Very interesting. Stan, you have one of the most interesting and unusual protagonists in Detective Kubu. Explain where he came from and tell us about him.
When we started writing, Michael and I, we were told that we should write what we knew. Both of us were professors, so we knew what nonfiction was, but we hadn't written any fiction. So based on our experience with the hyenas, we decided that the first chapter of our book would have a hyena eating the remains of a human. And it was very apparent to a game ranger and a professor of ecology who happened to be in the area that this was not an accidental situation. Because the human, who was dead and being eaten, had no clothes on, and hyenas don't generally eat clothes, and also the fingers had been chopped off. And so the two men there said, well, this is clearly a murder situation, we better get the police involved. So they were in the Central Kalahari Game Reserve, and they called Gaborone, which is the capital on the east side of the country. And the Criminal Investigation Department sent Detective David Kubu Bengu to investigate. And so we put him in a Land Rover and sent him off on a long trip over usually not very good roads to the Central Kalahari Game Reserve. And we had a lot of fun while we were writing that trip. You know, he's a very big man. Kubu means hippopotamus in the local Setswana language. And so, and he likes to sing, he likes opera and so on. He's got a terrible voice. So about the only place he can sing is in the car when he's alone. So you'd put a cassette in and sing whatever he was enjoying. And what happened was very surprising to Michael and me. And that is when he arrived at the Central Kalahari Game Park, he had taken over as the main character. Previously, as I said, there was a professor of ecology there, and he was shunted to one side, and Kubu said, I am your protagonist now. And so that's how he appeared. We call him our accidental protagonist.
That raises a really interesting question. How immersed do you get into your characters? I mean, do you set a place at the table for them at night and you fluff their pillows? How immersed do you get in with your characters? You speak of Detective Kubu like, he's out in the car waiting for you.
We feel about him and other characters that we write as though they are real people. And I think that's why things happen that are so surprising. I think Annamaria will say the same thing, and that is there are times when you're writing and you cannot make your characters do what you want them to do. They have a mind of their own and go off and do what they want to do. And Kubu showing up like that is just one example of that. But yeah, he's in my head pretty much the whole time.
Annamaria, how about you?
Yeah.
I mean, have your characters, ever surprised you?
Oh, they're always surprising me. They're always surprising me, and it's their story, And I've done this enough now that I know that I have to let them go. They need to, if they're real people, they have to have free will. So you have to let them do things, and mine do. And I don't always feel as if I'm making up the story. They're in a situation. I've learned enough about what life was like in British East Africa in 1911, say, that I have to be able to feel as if I'm there. So they are there, and they're walking around, and I just write down what they are saying and what they're doing. And sometimes they do things that surprise me a lot, so I have to slow down and say, what is this going to mean to my story? But I don't do that thing where I figure out, as brilliant people also write that way. They figure the whole thing out first, and that's the story they write. But I'm what we crime writers call a pantser. I'm flying by the seat of my pants. But I get so involved with them. Just yesterday, I was working on a manuscript, and I had to stop. And when I looked up, I thought, I'm in Minneapolis. But I was really so into the story that it was surprising. You can really, if you get that way, then the story tells itself to you. It's very lovely.
It's hard, I think, for people who don't write to understand what you have both talked about. I equate it to, like, when they say a baseball pitcher is in the zone, and he has no idea that there's a crowd there. All he can see is the catcher's mitt.
Yeah.
You know, and
But
when
you must have had the same experience.
I have, and I think at least all fiction writers, I think too, because we do become immersed in our story, immersed in our characters, and our characters do weird things that we don't want them to do, and they lead us off into stories that sometimes are really great, and sometimes we have to throw away later because if we're pantsers.
And sometimes the character is meant to be in a certain place, as Kubu was, and he's just a delightful guy. But they are there, and Stan just told us, Kubu said, I'm in charge.
Yeah. So your first book was about, you saw these hyenas eating wildebeest. Where do your subsequent books, you've got how many books in that series now, 10?
We're writing the 9th.
You're writing the 9th, so there are 8 out now. And I've read several of them, but where do you get the ideas for the various stories?
One of the things that both Michael and I are very interested in is how current events shape society and so on. And so all of our books have as a backstory an issue that is contemporary in Botswana. So even though the first chapter of our first book, which is called A Carrion Death, has a hyena eating a person, that's just a good premise. You have to tell a story around that. So what's the story? And so the story is about diamonds. Botswana is the largest producer of diamonds in the world. And of course, there are a lot of people who want to make money illegally about diamonds. So the story, the backstory is really about diamonds and diamond smuggling and diamond mining. So if that's the backstory, then we write something on top of that. The second book, the backstory, is the aftermath of the Rhodesian Civil War, how people who were involved with that behave when they meet each other, in our case, in a tourist camp in Botswana. And so each of the books has, as a backstory, something that you would expect to read about or bump into if you were in Botswana today.
Okay.
So, and then the story, of course, you make up on top of that.
So your books are contemporary in time frame. Annamaria, yours are set
In
a
the
century, more than, or about a century ago, a little
Yes.
more. Where do you find your stories then?
Well, I decided this was a very strange thing for me to do, but I had lost my dad when I was starting to think about that series, and among his the things that he left for me was a bookmark that had the 10 Commandments on it. And so I decided that I would write 10 books, and each one would be about the evil that's mentioned in the commandment, but also another evil that doesn't have a commandment, that I have the audacity to think I should suggest an 11th commandment, a 12th
Hey God,
commandment.
we need more commandments.
Well, I really think that that's true. The first one is the first commandment, and it's about the clash of cultures and religions when colonialists are taking over a territory that already has its own culture. So that's one of the things that is a background story. But there's also the whole question of colonialism itself. And I think there should be a commandment against people walking in and taking over space that belonged to some other people for millennia. So that's how it goes. The first one is strange gods. Thou shalt not have strange gods before me. We know those. And the next one is the idol of Mombasa. There's idolatry, but there. So each one, the blasphemer, and the fourth one, which came out last September, is a death on the Lord's Day, so that's where I'm going. And each one is a different year, 1911, 1912, 1913.
So there's 6 more to come.
Yes, I feel like my father gave me that as a gift.
That's nice. I've never heard anything like that in terms of where you found your storyline. So that's most interesting. So who inspires you? What writers inspire you?
Actually, one of the writers who inspired me are 2 men called Michael Sears and Stan Trollip, because I'm writing about Africa, and they are people who were born there, and so I am inspired by the way they handle Africa in the background.
Tell us, how did that friendship come about? How did you all meet?
It's there. You know, because you are one of us, that writers of crime fiction are a wonderful, wonderful collegial group of people. I feel like it's a tribe that I now belong to. But I first met Stan at a BoucherCon, which is a conference for crime writers, and he was writing about Botswana, and I had been to Botswana, and that was Botswana was the place, by chance, that I happened to fall in love with, being in the African wilderness. So I was very new. My first novel had just come out. I didn't feel like one of the crowd yet, but I had to talk to him because I had to tell him how in love I was with Botswana. So, and our friendship then blossomed because the people that were on that panel that he was on became a group who write a blog about crime writing and about the places that we write about, called Murder is Everywhere. And I wound up encountering people and becoming a member of that group, and so now we're blog mates and we're friends.
Well, it reminds me, there was a Michael Sears. We miss you. We wish you were here, but he's in London doing some bookish thing. But the three of you remind me of a group that was quite busy about 2 or 3 decades ago in Minnesota called the Minnesota Crime Wave.
Absolutely. Yeah.
William Kent Kruger and Ellen Hart. And he's going to kick me when I meet him because I can just whiffing on his name right now. But the three of them traveled together, and the three of you remind me so much of that. Stan, who's inspired you? What writers have inspired you?
I think you'll find them a little surprising. There are 2 books that really had a big impact on my view of writing. The first was Alice in Wonderland. And the reason for that was it just showed me the power of imagination. And I just loved it. And I can't count how many times I've gone back and read it. The second was a book, I don't remember when it was written, but I would guess 50 years ago, called On the Beach by Neville Shute, an Australian writer. It's a sort of an apocalypse story. Oh, okay. And I can remember, so I was a teenager probably when I read it, and I read it and I finished the whole book and turned off the light. And when my dad came in the morning to wake me up to go to school, I couldn't understand what was happening because I thought I was going to be dead. It was so powerful, the book. And again, it just showed to me the power of words. And so the first was the power of imagination, and the second was the power of words. And I've carried those 2 books and those 2 ideas with me ever since. And of course, now there are lots of contemporary writers who are excellent and who continue to make me enthusiastic and who inspire me and so on. But those 2 were the sort of seminal books for my head.
Oh, very interesting. You've written your most recent book that's been released is Wolfman, that you wrote by yourself.
Correct.
And then you've written with Michael for a long time. Okay, which is better?
Both are better.
As the true diplomat says.
That's an unfair question.
That's not fair. Okay, we'll pass
They
that.
are very different, and for different reasons, I enjoy both.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Annamaria, we were going to get back to this because I said you wrote some interesting nonfiction. One of the books you wrote was entitled Don't Work for a Jerk.
You never work for a jerk.
And it got you a spot on the Oprah show.
Yes, it did.
And so I want you to compare being on the Oprah show with being on Writer's Corner.
Actually, I'm much happier being here. And that is a sincere answer because I'm talking now about what I wanted to be all my life, and I am now one of those people. And so to be here with other crime writers was always my dream. And how could anything... Oprah, hooray. I was very glad that I got to be on the Oprah show. And there are members of my family who only invited me to, my distant family, and only invited me to their wedding because they wanted to brag that their cousin was on the Oprah show. But I brag about this because this is where I want to be.
Well, we're very flattered. And unfortunately, we're running out of time here. So please, viewers, go to your local bookstores and buy the books of these 2 fabulous authors. Thank you, Stan. Thank you, Annamaria.
Thank
for
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Rob
you.
Jung saying, take time to read a good book and hug your kids. Good night.